This podcast is proud to be part of the TalkSPORT Fan Network. TalkSPORT. Powered by fans.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Red Side of Trent. I am delighted to be joined by the Daily Mail Sports Tom Collomosse. How are you, Tom? Are you well?
I'm really well, thanks, Adam. Yeah, really looking forward to it.
No, thank you very much for joining us. Obviously, you've been covering a lot of Forest, a lot of Midland, other teams from the Midlands. How has your summer been so far? I'm assuming it's been busy as ever.
Yeah, fairly busy, hasn't it? Like this season, more than anything else, it doesn't really feel like there's been any interruption to the actual football because we had the Club World Cup, didn't we? And then the Women's Euros. So it feels like there's been this kind of continuation of it. And almost you can understand why pre-season might have passed a few people by because of those tournaments. But I'm at Birmingham tonight, and yeah, really looking forward to it all getting underway again.
Yeah, no, I'll be going to watch that because it's just football, isn't it? It's something to watch.
Exactly,
I wanted to start off at the top with obviously something that was very topical, maybe a week or so ago. But I needed people's opinions on this because I've spoke to so many different people and there's so many different varying opinions on this. Morgan Gibbs-white obviously ended up staying at Nottingham Forest, and Evangelos Marinakis made a point of flying over, getting the deal done, and then having an awkward interview where Morgan Gibbs-white looked like he had to say Marinakis' name a fair few number of times by signing this deal, it seemed, and everyone was obviously saying that Marinakis held him at a bit of knife point. What's your personal opinion on it, and what's been the kind of circulation of chatter around maybe the Daily Mail Sports officers?
I think this is a really interesting situation because if we go back to the spring, I think there was a general acceptance at Forest that Gibbs-white would leave. Nuno had accepted it. I think the players knew it. Gibbs-white himself accepted it too. And everybody thought that he would be going to Manchester City. People thought that was fairly well advanced. Nobody, I think you would know better than me, but didn't really feel like anyone among the fan base particularly begrudged him that. You know, you get to go to one of the best teams in the world. You've done 3 good years at Forest. But then the trail went completely cold on that. As far as I'm aware, Manchester City didn't want to pay the money. And then when Ryan Cherky became available, obviously he's a different kind of player from Gibbs-white, but they thought they could configure the squad in a different way, getting Cherky for £34 million, 4 years younger than Gibbs-white, rather than paying what, was up to 70 for Gibbs-white. And then, of course, it was a bit of limbo because I think people still thought that Gibbs-white might leave. And I actually think that Nuno himself probably wasn't entirely opposed to it, in the sense that, of course, he really rated Gibbs-white, really important player for him, captain a lot last season. But I think he'd got his head around the idea and was maybe thinking about the team in a different sort of way. I think we'll probably see the team play in a different style, certainly at the start of the season. And with the emergence of Elliot Anderson, he probably thought, again, he could reconfigure the team a bit and they could prosper without Gibbs-white. The timing of it, I think, was crucial. You had Anthony Elanga leaving a few days that week, didn't you, that same week? And again, I don't think that was a massively kind of unpopular one with Forest supporters. I think that Forest supporters, to me, seem quite realistic, I'd say, in comparison to the fans of a lot of clubs that I cover. I think you understand that while last year was an excellent season, you aren't just going to click your fingers and suddenly be winning the league, suddenly be the wealthiest club in the league. there seems to be an understanding of where you are currently in the food chain. Obviously, that may change. And so I didn't feel like there was a huge opposition to the Elanga deal. But then when the Gibbs-white one followed on the back of it, people start to think, oh, goodness, hang on a minute. This is two key members of our attack from last season. They've both gone in the same week. Who's coming in? What's happening? And I think that Evangelos Marinakis thought that Spurs were trying to put a fast one on Forest. And he's an owner who doesn't like to be put in a position where he might be seen to have lost the battle, I suppose. And if you look back to, and he does, I do think fan sentiment matters to him. So if you look back to the autumn of 2022, Leicester 4, Forest 0, looks like Steve Cooper would be gone, but you were probably in the ground. You remember the reaction to Cooper even when they were losing 4-0 to East Midlands derby. And I think that really counted. And the subsequent reaction, that really counted to them persevering with Cooper. I think it really did. And I think he was aware of supporter sentiment around the Gibbs-white deal. I don't think he liked the way it was done. That people were trying to, think they could get around him, not make a fool of him so much, but we'll just go on, we'll just pay the clause and that'll be done. And crucially, I don't think Gibbs-white was absolutely mad keen on going. If you look at it, there were options open to him at that time. He could have not come back for training. He could have handed the transfer request in. He could have behaved badly when he was training. He didn't do any of those things. So that tells me that he maybe wasn't entirely sold on Spurs. Maybe he was hoping City might come back, maybe. And then he goes and he signs the contract. And of course, it's important for Forest to be keeping a really important player. You can't see it in anything other than a positive light. But I'll be really interested to see how it all unfolds in the first couple of months of the season. Because as I said, I do think to an extent, Nuno had got his head around the fact that Gibbs-white would leave. Nuno's main gripe, I think, was the kind of public nature of City's pursuit of him and the cosy chat with Guardiola at Wembley. But I think there was an acceptance that he would leave. Then he doesn't. Suddenly you're not getting a transfer fee that you expected you were getting. And you have to kind of rethink your plans again, because Morgan Gibbs-white is the kind of player, I think, where to thrive, both the way he plays, but also he's the kind of guy he is. He thrives on being the main man, I think, feeling like he's the main man. And if he's not, I don't think you get the same out of him. Now, if Nuno was planning to design the team in a different way, does that mean he has to, look again at it? How does he fit all the pieces? So sorry, this is a really long answer, but I think it'll be fascinating, this, because I don't think it's quite as simple. Gibbs-white leaves, bad. Gibbs-white stays, brilliant. I think there's more subtlety to it than that, and I'll be really interested to see how it all shakes out.
I mean, what the one thing I'm interested to see with him, especially from watching the last friendly we played against Fiorentina, it was we adopted a bit more of a 4-4-2 essentially, with Igor Jesus dropping in as like the false 9 or 10, as you want to, whatever jargon you want to use, and Gibbs-white partnered Elliot Anderson in central midfield. Now I've watched Morgan Gibbs-white play a fair few times in central midfield, and actually think he's far better there. He gets on the ball a bit more. He doesn't do as many tricks and fancy passes as much. He actually starts to dictate play a lot more. I actually think it suits him much more. So maybe there's a stylistic change that Nuno sees because of Igor Jesus coming in, that he allows Morgan to drop that bit deeper and get on the ball a bit more. We will probably get into that a little bit more. I did want to ask you about what you thought about the whole Marinakis flying in thing and that interview, because it's such a big talking point. I went to a thing yesterday with a load of content creators as we record this, and they were talking about it still, and it's happened nearly 2 weeks ago. So it's obviously something that's very topical, because Evangelos Marinakis is loud when he wants to be, but he can also be quiet when he wants to be.
I think I wrote this at the time when I wrote about Gibbs-white. I think he's probably the most recognisable owner in English football now, which is no mean achievement when you consider he's only been in the Premier League 3 years, and Forest aren't one of the. It's not, Chelsea with Roman Abramovich, is it? That kind of level of ownership. So yeah, he wanted people to know that this was his show. He look, I did this. Look, guys, I've kept the captain. This is the ambition I have for the team. This is what I can do. This is how capable I am as an owner. So it very much was the Marinakis show, and that plays into what I was saying before about whether it is kind of 100% beneficial that this has transpired. Like I say, I think it's more subtle than Gibbs-White stays brilliant, Gibbs-White leaves terrible. I think there's more to it than that. But clearly, it was a Marinakis show because you didn't see anything from Nuno at all, did you? You ordinarily, in those situations, you would get, a manager would be interviewed and would say this, and this. Great that we kept him. And I'm sure, that will come in time. Of course, he's not going to say, well, to be honest, I wanted him gone. But yeah, it's rare now, isn't it, in this Premier League era of owners where you've got quite a lot of American owners from that kind of hedge fund background who really, most of them, if they, like John W. Henry, if he walked down the main street of my town, I don't think anybody would recognise him. And I think that's the case for a lot of owners. Marinakis is quite a throwback to, you're probably too young to remember a lot of this, but, owners in Italy and Spain in the 1980s and 1990s, where they'd constantly be in the media, wars of words and having a go at refs, and look back at some of those guys, and it was chaos, and it was so entertaining. You think of something like Jesus Hill at Atletico Madrid being the absolute epitome of it, and Marinakis is kind of a throwback to that, for good and bad. I think for good and bad, because I people look at him and they see the way he walks on the pitch after the Leicester game, or things that happen in the tunnel. At least the guy cares, and I do think that has its benefits with the team too. I remember I used to cover Tottenham for the Evening Standard, and I remember they lost a game to Juventus in the Champions League, and Mauricio Pochettino said a couple of days after the game that there'd been a controversial decision in the first half, and he remembered that at half-time you had Andrea Agnelli, who was the owner of Juventus at the time, Giuseppe Marotta, who was the chief executive, all kind of surrounding the ref in the tunnel. And Pochettino thought that had influenced the referee in the second half. And he was saying, look, maybe we need to be a bit like that. Maybe when we go to big games away from home, we need to feel that, the execs are with us. Sure enough, the season after, they played Dortmund, and there's Daniel Levy in a tracksuit watching the rondos in the training session. And Marinakis is of that ilk, and I do think players feel it. Probably times when they kind of think, oh goodness, I wish he wouldn't do that. But I think the good outweighs the bad if you're a Forest fan, if you're a Forest player.
I personally think that I think he's been brilliant for us, because of, I can only speak from what he's done on the pitch and off the pitch in some respects, because taking us from lingering in mid-table of the Championship consistently, and then obviously starting the season poorly with Chris Hughton, and then getting Steve Cooper in and getting us promoted, and then the rest is now kind of happening, isn't it? It's been a bit of a whirlwind. I don't know how Netflix have not picked us up for a documentary, but
I agree.
But I think his presence has been brilliant, and like people say, oh, he held Morgan to a like knife point almost. It almost looks like it's a kidnapping kind of message out from Morgan doing that interview. I personally think Morgan Gibbs-White doesn't really like doing interviews. He doesn't do them very often, even for local.
No, you're correct. You're correct in that. He
because the one thing I look at, and this is goes into my next point, Tom, because you wrote something in one of your later articles about Callum Hudson-Odoi, who's got 1 year left. If Marinakis was really how people perceive him to be, would he not get Callum Hudson-Odoi in a room now, and with less than 12 months left on his contract, and go, you need to sign this contract now because we don't want to lose you for free? I don't think that's the case, but how do you see that going? Because Callum Hudson-Odoi's now got the number 7 shirt, which he wanted last season off Nico Williams. Got that. His mate stayed in Olorina. I know his other mate at Lango's gone, but now more Gibbs-White stayed. We're looking like we're linked to some good players. Can you see a situation where Callum Hudson-Odoi will sign an extension deal? Because I think it is really pivotal before the end of the window that he does that, because we do risk him talking to clubs in January.
I think I would expect him. Look, I'm not going to come on here and say, look, I know what's going to happen, because I don't. But if you look at how it's gone for Forest, they've done. It's been a decent window, hasn't it? Not just in terms of the players who they've signed, but the players who they've kept. Williams signed a new deal, Aina signed a new deal, Gibbs-White signed a new deal. Maybe he's slightly different, but some of the key guys have stayed. Wood was just later towards the back of the season, Stells as well. So I could imagine, I would think on balance, he would probably sign. They've definitely been looking around, I think, this summer, him and his advisors. I think there's definitely been conversations. But I, on balance, would say that he would sign. And you're right in what you say about Marinakis and Gibbs-White. And it goes back to what I said something earlier. That Gibbs-White, okay, had he kicked up a fuss, he could have forced his way out, and he could have become mega unpopular with the Forest fans. But he could have done it, And Marinakis wouldn't have been able to do anything about that. So it's foolish. People say, "Oh, he forced him to stay." No, he didn't. He stayed because it's it's going to make him an incredibly wealthy man. And look, 12 months time, who knows? There's contracts nowadays. I look at it never got to this sort of point of where he was this close to leaving. But you look at Jack Grealish, Aston Villa, signed a new deal after their first season. But 12 months later, he's gone to Man City now. As far as I understand it, there isn't a clause in Gibbs-White's contract. And I don't think there's any kind of agreement, official or otherwise, of we'll let you go in 12 months. But you can see a situation, can't you, where if the right offer comes in, everybody could get on board with it.
Yeah, like a gentleman's agreement. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
No,
I don't think it exists yet, but it's just something that you could see in the natural course of things that could develop.
Yeah, I can completely understand that. I think majority of Forest fans will understand that as well. Like because of what's happened, I think it's a situation where see what happens this season. If we can have another good season, you might end up changing your mind. Obviously, he's due to have another child as well. That's a lot to kind of comprehend as a person, never mind just as a footballer with so much going on. It all comes into play. But I know he quite likes going to London and stuff, and I know his partner's a content creator and what have you. So it all factors in and what happens in this coming season. Obviously, in your article as well, you wrote about five players wanted by Forest. Now we keep getting linked to about 1 million, as it always is the stick to beat us with after that first season of coming up. So the list is quite long. Obviously, Adama Traore, you've got McAtee, Douglas Luiz, Dylan Bakwa, who's been the latest one, and Maury Hutchinson, we had a bid rejected for. There's Jackson Chatchua. There's a host of players. Is there? Do you know where Forest are trying to look in terms of positions? Because it seems like we know that wingers is a big priority, and maybe central midfield. But is there somewhere else where Forest where you think Forest are really pushing hard for?
I think they want cover everywhere, and they want to increase the depth of the squad because of Europe. Obviously, they don't know what competition they're going to be in yet, but they want that. I think of the names you mentioned, McAtee is one that you should definitely keep a close eye on. I think if he were to come in, this all adds into the slightly different playing style. They could see him kind of playing off the right and drifting in, rather than last year where you had those two pure flying wingers. Adama Traore, again, one to keep a close eye on. I think you look at the association with Nuno. I followed followed Wolves when Traore and Nuno were there together, and it was a good relationship. Really, it was a kind of a, you know, uncle nephew. The nephew really wanted to impress the uncle, and you know, he had some great games for them, and he was improving. I think it was a shame for him that Nuno got sacked. He just started to get him to crack the code a little bit, and that would very much be a Nuno signing, I think, because if you look back, he also tried to get into Spurs when he was at Spurs. He didn't get in at Spurs, and I think he could be a good barometer, Traore, of how much influence Nuno's having there, because that would very much be his signing. For the other, I think what Forest do in recruitment a lot is that, whereas other clubs will have a kind of right, here's our list of targets, there's a definite 1, 2, 3. I get the impression that Forest have maybe a few who are kind of on an equal level, you know, and they'll test the water for all of them. So the young player at Strasbourg backward will be one of those. It's probably somebody who's popped up on the radar. Okay, you know, he's somebody who could fill that role, or could it be Traore, or could it be other players? And they see which deal is the most attractive. I think there's kind of a lot of players who are on that level, you know, rather than we got to go get that guy, if that makes sense. And I think that's probably why you see them get linked to so many players. Marinakis also, he has really good, strong relationships with a lot of the top agents. And I think generally that's a benefit because it enables you to get decent players through the door, but also it can mean that there's a lot of noise at times like this. Douglas Luiz is another one, I think. Juventus would like to sell him permanently. He's been a disaster there. That'll be difficult, I think, initially because of the bad season he's had. Someone's just going to pay, 40 million euros for him on the strength of what he did for Aston Villa. But you could see it a loan with an option that becomes an obligation if he satisfies certain conditions. I think if that's to happen, that's probably the most likely outcome.
Yeah, I think the one thing about Douglas Luiz, and I think people that are looking from outside within are looking at that deal and saying, "Oh, it looked great," but because of what he did at Juventus and his supposed attitude, is that something that Nuno and the rest of the squad are going to be able to handle? Because I think Douglas Luiz comes across as someone that is maybe a bit ego-driven a little bit. I think at Aston Villa he had that as maybe being one of the key players there. Would he come to Forest where maybe the expectations are not lower as such, because I think as an Aston Villa are a bit on an even keel. They're just on a bit more of an upward trajectory from being in the league a little longer. But is he going to come in and when the tough gets going, because it's going to happen, is he going to roll his socks up and get on with it and dig in for the team? That is something that will probably come into question. And I think Forest fans will see that if he start.
I mean, I cover Villa as well, so what I remember is that he was really, really good in the. So you remember the 1920 season, and it was interrupted for COVID, and then they came back and finished the season. He was brilliant in that period, that Project Restart period. He was really, really good, and him and Conso were Villa's best players in that time, and Villa had looked like they were gone, and the kind of leap that those two made probably kept them up. So he can do it. I think the issue to keep an eye on really is that Unai Emery thought in the second half of that, because him and Kamara were together, they were a really super partnership. Unai Emery just thought he took his eye off the ball a bit. I remember a game against Olympiacos in the Conference League, and there was a break in play. And Emery practically went on the pitch and he was properly screaming in Douglas Luiz's face for everyone to see. And we all thought at the time, he's gone. That's not coming back. That's the sort of public nature of that. And Emery they needed to sell that summer for PSR, and he was definitely the guy who was going to go. Probably he realised that he had his one foot out the door. But I think he's one of those players that if they can get his focus back, he's a very useful guy to have around. That season, I can't remember if it was the season Villa got in the Champions League or the season where Emery took over from Gerrard. But I mean, you can write off the Gerrard period because they were all hopeless in that period, really. But I think he was double figures for goals and assists, maybe in that, and he's a good penalty taker, good set piece taker. So there's a lot that he brings to the table if he can get that focus back, and I see no reason why he shouldn't really. There's a World Cup at the end of the year. It's a big thing for everybody. It's time Brazil won a World Cup, really. In the normal course of things, you think that they'd be strong. And he's going to want to be part of that. There's a good Brazilian core there. I think what happened a little bit at Villa was that they had a really tight South American core, and it started to break up a little bit. And that, probably didn't help Douglas Luiz. But you've got your kind of solid South American Brazilian core at Forest, and yeah, I think it could be a good deal. I do, and may well be proved wrong. No goals, 1 assist, and back on loan in January. But he's somebody who can do it at the level, and I think if you can get him right, he'd have a lot to offer.
Yeah, no, I think if he came stylistically, that would help us as well, because of last season as being primarily a counter-attacking team, which the rest of the league kind of found. They found something wrong with it. It seemed like everyone had to play pet ball or whatever, and we were just going, no, we're not doing that because we can't. I think he's someone that elevates us to that next level, and you spoke about what Nuno was trying to do in training and then in pre-season games this season so far, in pre-season, should I say. How do you see that developing? Because obviously Nuno has always been that kind of pragmatic manager of being set in his ways of playing counter-attack. We saw it at Wolves 3-4-3, but then with the likes of Ruben Neves and João Moutinho in central midfield, he was able to then develop that style. Obviously, Diego Jota, Raul Jimenez, Traore on the wings. They were really good to watch, Wolves, at times when he got the right players in. I think, could that be the same thing at Forest?
Yeah, what's really interesting about the time at Wolves that you mentioned, by the way, I'd really hope Forest wouldn't lose that counter-attacking ability they have and just become another team that plays in that broadly similar way. But I go back to August 2020, and Wolves had just lost in an empty stadium in Germany to Sevilla in the quarterfinals of the Europa League, as everybody was catching up. And he gave a press conference after that game where he said, we need to change the style. More goals, more chances created, keeping the ball more. And he switched to a back four. Obviously, he played back four a lot for us, but it was a big thing at Wolves. Switched to back four for a game against Arsenal in November, which they won. Now, unfortunately, for his project, that was also the night when Raul Jimenez got an injury that nearly ended his career or worse. And that not only affected the team, which more importantly affected the whole environment. And Nuno really struggled with all the COVID restrictions. And ultimately, to keep his job and to keep Wolves up to the end of the season, he went back to what he knew. He went back to that cautious, counter-attacking approach. Then he was sacked. So we never know. We've never seen what might have happened had that worked. But maybe we will now, because he doesn't have any of those difficulties that were kind of hindering him at the time. And we will see if he's a coach who's able to move from what he knows into doing something different. I think that it's really fascinating for us this year. I think not, Marinakis always causes a level of interest, doesn't he? But I was quite worried about them. I think at the end of last season, I think the form was really dropping off. I think often if you look at teams in a sort of 12-month calendar, 12-month calendar year cycle, as they were then, I thought, oh gosh, Gibbs-White might go, Elanga might go. the level of play they bring in might not be so great. Players might be fed up with the style, and they could just kind of go, you know. But I think there's a lot more to be optimistic now about. I think it's really, really a really interesting story, and I'm looking forward to. I think I'm there next weekend. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, I'm fascinated to see it as well, and this is a good one because I think you cause a bit of uproar with this comment at the end of the article about Ibrahim Sangare, and now he's been a key player towards the end of last season, and then in this preseason he's featured heavily and looked like the Sangare we was expecting from PSV for £35 million or euros or whatever it was at the time, and you mentioned about that. There's a possibility he could still leave, and I think that caused a lot of upset. I mean, what caused you to write that comment, and why do you think that could potentially be a case?
Well, first thing, why do they keep looking for central midfielders? You know, if they're so happy with the options they've got, why do they keep looking for more?
For me personally, just to answer that question quickly, we need more depth there. I think if Nuno's to change to a 4-3-3, you need more depth there, and with more games, I guess. And no offense to people like Ryan Yates, we need better than him. I think you look at like teams like City and Arsenal and Chelsea and even Tottenham to an extent. They've all got so many good players that could play for pretty much any club in the league. I think you just need those more options.
Of course, but also that got to understand that Nottingham Forest, Spurs, okay, if you leave them to one side, they're not Man City, they're not Arsenal. They have to cut the cloth. And it was interesting that one of the stories that came out of Italy that would clearly have been briefed, I would say, from the Juventus side, was that they perhaps looked to get Sangare in a deal for Douglas Luiz. Now, again, if they didn't think he was a player who was available, they wouldn't even consider it as an idea. They're not going to now go, oh well, can we get Morgan Gibbs-White in the deal? It's not going to happen. They know he's not available. And I just think I think he's a really good player. I remember watching him for PSV Eindhoven. They played Leicester over a couple of games in the Conference League. It looks like a really tidy player. I'm just not sure he's a player for English football. I think he just needs that fraction of a second more than you get in the Premier League. And some players, first 6 months they turn up and think, oh goodness, what's going on? And then they sort themselves out. He's obviously had problems with injury selection. I am not sure the type of player he's ever going to get there. And he's how old? 27 years old now?
I think so, something like that.
The obsession with young players is a bit wild. I think I was talking to somebody, a Crystal Palace fan, who said that they couldn't believe that no one had come in for Eze, and the conclusion only being that he's now considered kind of too old. And it's probably the last time that you could get decent money for him. And also, Adam, what you have to remember with these articles is that it's a long article. You write something that's one line towards the end of it, that gets pulled out on social media, and everyone then says, who is this idiot saying that Sangare is going to leave, whereas they don't see it in the whole context of the piece. So I just maybe remind people of that as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's a completely relative point. I think it's a good point as well, because we have seen him struggle, especially when players just run past him, sort of thing, and he was causing lots of fouls. I just think towards the end of the season, when we seem to be having a bit of a dip in form, he seemed to be the one that was shining out of it. Like he was taking kind of responsibility of getting on the ball and making things happen, and look like a half decent player for once, which we've not seen enough of. So I think it was just a comment where it was a bit out of the blue, because no one thought, oh, Sangare must be available. But I can completely see it. Like it's not out of the realms of possibility.
And it's interesting, isn't it, that you say he's had a really strong pre-season. In pre-season, people aren't going absolutely hell for leather, are they? No. They're not. Putting the foot down to the floor as they will in the first few games. So again, look, if he's kind of corrected that, if he's overcome that, and he is just got that little, like I said, fraction of a second quicker and everything he does, then yeah, he could really be a player for the Premier League. I'm just not sure he's going to at 27.
Yeah. We're having a European campaign for the first time in 30 odd years, Tom. Whether we know what competition, we're going to find out on Monday. The CAS hearing is happening as we record this. What's your opinion on the whole deal anyway, but also Forest being back in Europe, and how good is that to hear?
Brilliant, isn't it? It's great, and I really hope, and I think they will, whatever competition they're in, they absolutely fly at it. And I think Nuno will be an asset like that, because it's because of the kind of focus on the big six, etc., so-called little stories and little achievements go unnoticed or go under the radar. And if you look at that season, the COVID season, if you want to call it, the 1920 season, what Nuno did that year was remarkable. It was kind of second season up, so there's a bit of a dip. They finished seventh again, despite a bad start. They had started that season, the Europa League, right back in the July, because they had to go through all of the qualifiers. And they got to the quarterfinals. And do you know what? Sevilla were a much better team, but it was one of those sliding doors moments that they got a penalty early on. Jimenez missed it. Jimenez never missed a penalty. He missed that one. So it was an incredible achievement. And I think Forest should take encouragement from that, because he's a manager who knows how to do a European campaign. Obviously, I wouldn't compare him with Unai Emery, because Unai Emery's won the thing 4 times. But he gets Europe. He knows how to sort of organise his resources. And somehow with Wolves then, he managed to kind of keep a pretty small squad fit all the way through. It'll be interesting to see how he develops that now, because I think even in the last 5 years, football's got so much quicker, so much more athletic. Whether you can get away with doing that now, I'm not too sure. But Nuno historically likes a tight group. He likes to find his tight group and trust it and stick with it. That's kind of his comfort zone. So again, another fascinating element of how it's all going to shake down for Forest.
And people forget he's a Champions League winner. Like, he was a goalkeeper for Porto in that Champions League campaign under Jose Mourinho. And I mean, he doesn't strike me as the manager that would tell people that. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I think we had Michael Mancienne on, and he said that Aitor Karanka would constantly remind the squad he'd won the Champions League with Real Madrid, and
really?
I just feel like, it's just stupid, to be honest, doing that with players who are below that level. Like, just is irrelevant. So do you think, if I know you said Nuno wants a tight squad, but I think it was evident towards the end of last season he knew that the squad wasn't good enough, because he just was not using depth. Like, Sosa was not being used, and now he's gone. Jota looks like he's going to be on the way out, and he wasn't getting used as much. So I think if Forest can get these players across the line in terms of who they've been linked with, and the right players, obviously, because that's all important, do you think they can still have a relatively strong league campaign as well as Europe then?
I don't know. And I think a lot of it comes down to, look, how these guys settle in, but also 2 things. Can he do as he did at Wolves? Is it possible in football today to have a kind of tight group you rely on and still do well in Europe and at home? If it's not, is he kind of, it's less a sort of, I think it sounds silly, but it's more a sort of emotional, psychological thing with him. I think he just likes, right, these are my guys, that's what I like. I don't think he's comfortable swapping players around. I think even if he had, let's say you say to Nuno one day, right, here are the 25 best players in the world in the squad, right? You've got them for a whole season. I reckon you'd still get to the end of the season and they would still have got the fewest number of, do you know what I mean? Like 15 or 16 players would have played all the games. I just think that's where he is. So I'm interested to see if he can kind of get himself out of that zone of what's always worked for him and actually use it. If he can, then yeah, I think they can do well in both. I'm really excited to see. I watch quite a lot of Italian football. I'm really excited to see hudson-odoi. I think he's a really good player. You never know. It's like with anybody, isn't it? Anybody goes to work in a different country, living different. It's obviously easier for footballers because they have a lot arranged for them. But it's still that big shift. You're taking your family over. Everything's different. So you never know how they'll adapt. But if he does, I think that could be a really good signing. He's an excellent player. I really think that.
The one thing I think Nuno, like what works for him in terms of the small squad though is the fact that now football is 5 substitutions as well.
Yeah,
and I think
that's right.
it allows him
Still
to
make any subs, doesn't he?
Yeah. To be fair, last season he used it really well. He was quite often using all 5 substitutions.
Yeah.
And I think that the only time it really like bit him in the backside was the Leicester game, because he got ill-advised with the Taiwo situation and should have took Taiwo off, and it was an absolute car crash of a situation, because we win that game, we're in the Champions League, we're having a completely different conversation. We've probably secured the signings of half the players that we wanted and maybe even more. So it's an interesting one. One question I did add today, and I haven't asked you actually about this, is do you think this could be a sliding doors sort of season for Forest and Nuno, especially because now we've got into Europe and we had a bit of a taste of what's it like to be in the top 5 for quite a lot of last season. I think it was 12 weeks we were in there for, and we had a bit of a
third for a long time.
The supercomputer seems to keep thinking that we're going to finish in like the bottom 4 or 5, but it is a possibility with Forest, because it's just, you just never know with us. We're a bit of a weird football club, and everyone looks into pre-season too much. But how big of a season is this?
First of all, I don't think they'll finish in the bottom 4 or 5.
I don't.
a lot would have to go wrong, for that to happen. You'd have to lose a couple of key players early on. Maybe someone gets sold. I just don't see it happening. But I also think repeating last year is unlikely. And it's not really Forest's fault. It's just what teams can spend now, isn't it? And they keep getting it wrong. But in the end, not Forest, the teams with all the wealth, they keep not quite doing it. But in the end, it reaches a tipping point, doesn't it, where you almost can't fail because you've just invested so much. I think the outcome of this CAS thing is huge, actually, because I've been saying this about Villa as well, and I'd apply it to Forest. I think if you're in the Europa League and you're Villa or Forest, you absolutely go hell for leather in that, because you've got the strength of English football now, so financially. Manager like Nuno knows Europe. There's a much better chance, I think, of Forest winning that than ending up in the top 5. And that basically gives you a pass into the Champions League, doesn't it? And then all kinds of things can happen. I think if you're in the Conference League, it's brilliant. It's still great. You try and when you get to the Europa League, but the idea that they're then going to go into the Champions League by the league, I think that'd be sensational and very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I've lost train of thought what I was going to ask you, but because of the CAS deal, actually, I just wanted your opinion. What do you think will happen with that? Do you think Palace have got a case? Do you think they've got a leg to stand on, or do you think they will avoid all kind of? They really will set a precedent if they allow Palace back in the Europa League, personally, because of what they've already done with certain teams.
Like, it's probably not the answer you want to hear. First of all, I don't know, but what I always think with these cases is they are almost 100% political rather than being legal. So what I mean by that is, if UEFA think it's prudent to send a message about these things, they won't let them back in. If they think that, actually this sends a really bad message that we're letting loads of clubs get away with it, as people might see it, but we're going to kick them out, they'll let them back in. I think that would be the only consideration, and you can make the wording work as you want to work it. What I would say as well is, it's a shame that it's got to this point, isn't it? That you have, two clubs who I think most people, neutrals, like to see do well, and now they're kind of at loggerheads. And Forest season was one of the stories last year. Palace beat Man City in the FA Cup, brilliant. I think everybody liked that, didn't they? That now you've got a situation where two fan bases who should kind of be on the same side, really, are at each other's throats. You've got two clubs who are, it'll be an interesting one at Selhurst Park, won't it? That first week of the season, put it that way. I just don't know about a cast. What's your feeling about it? How do you think it'll go?
The way I see it, and all the evidence that's been presented into the public, is that Palace have just messed up, and the problem is no one had the sympathy for Forest with the points deduction. Yes, we probably should have got more. I admit that, because I said that to Jeff Stilling on TalkSPORT. But that was what we got given, and we had to get on with it. And we thankfully got away with it in terms of still staying up, because the three that got relegated that season were still so incredibly bad. I personally think that Steve Parish has made too many excuses. I think the whole Texan not having influence is completely thrown out, especially from his interview on TalkSPORT, where he admitted that he's tried to do this and that. He tried to get Oliver Glasner at Lyon before he coincidentally ended it at Palace. If that's not decisive influence, I don't know what is. So it's a shame, because at the end of the day, the club and the supporters at most are getting punished. But at the same time, Palace are still going to be in some form of Europe. I know the Europa League brings more money, but they've got a better chance of winning the Conference League as a Forest, and keeping their squad relatively fit for the league campaign. So it's lose, win, lose. I don't really know. I don't care anymore. I just want it sorted, and I just want to know what we're playing.
When you know,
I know Reese, who comes on this podcast, I don't think he'll mind me saying he's already booked the flight for Friedrichstad and for when we go there, which has only cost him £18 if anyone wants to know, from Stansted Airport. So he's not losing out if he can't go, or isn't going to go. But I just want to get in sorted. I think Forest are now going to be the villains of the Premier League this season. I think even all neutrals have decided that we're bad guys because of this whole letter that was supposedly written grassing Crystal Palace. Like UEFA would never have noticed that they've got a multi-club ownership potential. I find that baffling. But just to finish off the pod, Tom, I'm just going to do a little bit of fun. So these are the pots for potential for the Europa League. Obviously, some teams might not be in this because they might fall out from the qualifiers of the Champions League or anything. Where would you go? You have to pick a team from each pot for an away trip. Where would you go?
Just as a trip, like if I'm wanting to enjoy it, or
both football and trip.
I'd really like. I'd love to go to the Betis Stadium, the Benito Villamarin. So Seville from pot one, I think. Real Betis obviously being the other club there. Forest would be pot two. Forest would be pot three, pot two. Have a look at those. I think again, Istanbul, Fenerbahce, meant to be a brilliant atmosphere in those grounds. Went to Besiktas with Wolves a few years ago, but Fener and Gala is meant to be another level, isn't it? And then Bologna. Lived in Italy for a year, lovely city, quite happily go back there. What about you?
I mean, where would you go pot three? You can't say Forest, obviously.
Pot three, sorry, I missed that, didn't I? Done Warsaw. Freiburg's meant to be nice, isn't it? Or maybe Nice. Freiburg or Nice. Freiburg's in Forest.
Nice is lovely. It's so expensive.
Yeah, well. Nice.
You can get a train from Nice to Monaco for a little day.
Yeah, you can. I did last year. Yeah, for the Villa game. So there's some good options there, aren't there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I picked Dynamo Zagreb I've been to Zagreb before and it was nice. Yeah. I'd like to go there. I also picked Young Boys because their stadium name is the Wankdorf. That's the joke that I've been running for several weeks. Although it would be really funny to play Leon, wouldn't it? After all this, if we got in.
Yeah, oh gosh, yeah.
Lego Warszawa is somewhere I'd like to go because my family's from Poland. It's a different place I've never been. I've also never been to Nice.
That's an atmosphere and half there.
Yeah. Well, their
Yeah.
ultras I bet are a
Yeah.
feisty bunch. And we had David Jackson from Radio Nottingham, and he said Panathinaikos for the
Oh yeah, of
the
course, yeah.
pantomime of it all. But
Can you imagine? Can you imagine?
I chose Paphos because I thought it'd be quite nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then just, I mean, last of all, just rounding off, Tom, is a red hot take for Forest this season. I gave you an example of Mason who came on. He predicted Matt Sells to get 10 plus clean sheets. He's now been nominated in the Ballon d'Or and for the Yassine Award after getting the Golden Glove with David Raya last year. So what a prediction that was. I never expected anything like that to come off. So what's your red hot take?
No, I'm not sure I can follow that. I'd say hudson-odoi to be one of the signings of the season, to get double figures in either goals or assists.
I mean, that would be an incredible signing. And I think if he does, I think that represents a good year for Forest, because if you've got someone that's doing that sort of thing, then someone else is obviously scoring goals if he's getting assists as well. Probably Chris Wood again. Tom, thank you very much for joining us. Is there anything that you would like to plug before you go?
Yeah, all my content you can see on Daily Mail Sport. Some of it behind the paywall, some of it free. So I'd encourage as many of you as possible to sign up. There's going to be lots of good Forest stuff on there throughout the season. So please come and have a read.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for joining us on this pod. If you've enjoyed it, do like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Come on, you Reds.